Ethan Cole slammed his toolbox on the floor of the 51st floor hallway and pressed his back flat against the wall, chest heaving, heart hammering like a drum in a burning church. He had seen something he was never supposed to see. And the woman standing on the other side of that door, the most powerful CEO in the city, had seen him. In 30 seconds, his entire life had just detonated. One broken light, one wrong door, one moment that would rewrite everything. Drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, hit subscribe. You do not want to miss what happens next. Ethan Cole had a rule. Keep your head down, do your job, go home to your daughter. That was it. That was the whole philosophy. No drama, no ambition beyond what was necessary, no reaching for things that weren't meant for men like him. He wasn't bitter about it. He had long ago made peace with what his life was and what it wasn't. He had Lily. He had a paycheck. He had a small apartment in the Riverside district with a busted radiator that he'd fixed 3 times himself because calling maintenance at his own building felt like a professional insult. He was 41 years old, black, broad-shouldered, with calloused hands and quiet eyes that had seen more grief than they advertised. He wore his Hale Industries Navy uniform with the kind of dignity that doesn't need an audience. The ID badge around his neck read, Cole E. Maintenance Technician, Level 2. He'd been Level 2 for 6 years. He wasn't Level 3. He wasn't trying to be. Lily was 6. She liked dinosaurs and grape juice and sleeping with the hall light on. Every morning, Ethan made her eggs scrambled, never runny, and every night he read her 2 pages of whatever book she'd picked from the library that week, doing all the voices until she laughed so hard she forgot to be sleepy. That was his world. That was enough. He arrived at Hale Industries at 6:45 every morning, 15 minutes before his shift started, because being early was the one luxury a man in his position could actually afford. The building was a 52-story glass tower in the financial district that seemed designed to remind everyone who entered exactly where they stood in the food chain. The lobby was marble and light. The executive elevator required a separate keycard. The maintenance staff used the freight elevator on the west side, the one that smelled like hydraulic fluid and old coffee. Ethan didn't mind. He minded his own. That Tuesday started like every other Tuesday. He was on the 14th floor replacing a junction box when his radio crackled. Cole? It was Marcus Webb, the facilities supervisor. A big man with a short fuse and a clipboard he treated like a weapon. Yeah, Ethan said, not looking up from the panel. I need you on 51. Ethan's hands stopped moving. He set down his wire stripper slowly. Say again. 51, executive floor. Got a work order, just came in, light fixture malfunction in the CEO's private office. Apparently it's been flickering for 2 days, and nobody up there can function like adults. Marcus's voice had the particular tone of a man who found the problems of rich people both annoying and slightly satisfying. Yolanda was supposed to handle it, but she called out sick. You're the closest. Webb, I'm not cleared for 51. You are now. I'm clearing you. Temporary access just for the job. Take the executive elevator. I'm sending a code to your phone. Fix the light. Come back. Don't touch anything you don't need to touch. Don't talk to anyone you don't need to talk to. And for the love of everything, Cole, don't be weird about it. Ethan looked down at his tools, at his hands, at the 14th floor hallway with its scuffed baseboards and fluorescent hum. Copy that, he said. The executive elevator was everything the freight elevator wasn't. Ethan stepped in, and the doors closed with the kind of smooth, cushioned silence that cost money. The interior was paneled in brushed steel and dark walnut. There was a small screen displaying building news. There was a subtle scent, something clean like cedar and cold air, that made the elevator feel like it belonged to a different building entirely. His phone buzzed. Marcus had sent the floor code and a single follow-up text. Don't forget you're a ghost up there. In and out. Ethan pocketed his phone. The elevator rose without a sound. He watched the numbers climb. 30, 35, 40. He noticed his own reflection in the steel panel, his uniform, his badge, the toolbox in his left hand. He looked exactly like what he was. He straightened his collar out of habit. 48, 49, 50, 51. The doors opened. The first thing that struck him was the quiet. Not the absence of noise exactly, but a different kind of quiet. The kind that comes from carpet so thick it swallowed footsteps, from walls lined with acoustic panels disguised as art from air, that was somehow 10 degrees cooler and smelled faintly of something that might have been money if money had a scent. The executive floor was a long corridor of frosted glass and dark wood. There were no cubicles, no bulletin boards, no paper anywhere. Two men in suits sat at desks near the elevator bay, and both of them looked up at Ethan the second he stepped off. One of them, young sharp suit, the expression of a man who had never once in his life questioned whether he belonged somewhere, stood immediately. "Can I help you?" He said it the way people say it when they mean the opposite. Ethan held up his badge. "Maintenance. Work order for the CEO's office. Light fixture." The man looked at the badge, looked at Ethan, looked at the toolbox. His expression cycled through something complex. "We weren't notified," he said. "Your facilities supervisor was—" Ethan said, keeping his voice even. "Marcus Webb, you can call down and confirm." A pause. The other man at the desk was already on the phone, murmuring something. A moment later, he looked up and nodded. The sharp suit man, his nameplate said, Derek Holt. Executive Coordinator, relaxed exactly 2%. "Ms. Hale is currently in a meeting in the conference suite," Derek said. "Her office is unoccupied, down the hall, last door on the left. You have—" He glanced at his watch. "Approximately 20 minutes before she returns." "That's plenty," Ethan said. He didn't wait for an invitation. He walked down the corridor, toolbox in hand, eyes forward. The CEO's office was at the far end of the hall, behind a door that was heavier than it looked. The nameplate beside it was simple, clean steel lettering, Aurora Hale, Chief Executive Officer. Ethan stood outside it for exactly 2 seconds. He knocked twice. No answer. He turned the handle. The office was enormous. He registered that in the first half-second, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city like the building was showing off. He didn't dwell on the view. His eyes went straight to the ceiling, to the fixture on the left side of the room near the private seating area, the one that would be flickering. He could see, even from the doorway, that the housing was loose, a vibration issue, probably building settling, or HVAC pressure. He moved toward it. He set his toolbox down, opened it, reached for his screwdriver and his voltage tester. He did not look at the desk. He did not look at the personal photographs or the awards on the walls or the bookshelves behind the seating area. He was a ghost. Marcus had been clear. He was reaching up toward the fixture standing on the step stool he'd pulled from his kit when he heard it. A door. Not the main office door he'd left that partially open behind him. This was a different door, an interior door, on the far side of the room. He turned his head automatically, the way any human being turns toward an unexpected sound, and time stopped. Aurora Hale had just stepped out of what was clearly a private dressing room, a narrow corridor closet built into the office wall, which Ethan had not registered existed, which was not on any floor plan he'd ever seen, which had apparently been her solution to the problem of needing to change for the press event that was scheduled in 2 hours. She was not fully dressed. She was wearing a slip ivory silk stopping at mid-thigh, and she had a blazer in one hand and her phone in the other, and she was looking down at her screen, reading something with the concentrated focus of a woman who had never once in her life expected anyone to be standing on a step stool in her office at 11:14 on a Tuesday morning. She looked up. Their eyes met. And Ethan Cole, maintenance technician level 2, a man who had spent 6 years being invisible in this building, felt the world underneath him tilt like a ship taking on water. He moved first. He stepped backward off the stool, nearly knocked it over, spun toward the wall, turning his back to her, completely, hands up at chest height, like a man surrendering to something he couldn't even name. "I am—" His voice came out strange. "I am so sorry. I was told the office was empty. I knocked. There's a work order. The light. I knocked." Silence. He could hear his own blood moving. "I know," she said. Her voice was nothing like he'd expected. He'd expected cold, corporate. He'd heard stories about Aurora Hale everyone in the building had. She was 38, brilliant, ruthless, and reportedly capable of ending a career with the same emotional energy most people use to order coffee. She'd taken over Hale Industries at 32, after her father's stroke, doubled the company's valuation in 4 years, and had never once to anyone's knowledge been caught off guard. Her voice was none of those things. It was measured, yes, and careful, but underneath it there was something human, something that surprised him almost as much as the moment itself. "I know you knocked," she said again. "I didn't hear it. I was on a call." Ethan kept his back to her, his hands lowered slowly. "I'll go," he said. "I'll come back, or I can send someone else. I am Ms. Hale. I am deeply sorry. This was not intentional. Stop apologizing." He stopped. He heard movement, fabric, the soft sound of a hanger. "Give me 30 seconds, she said. There was no panic in it, no fury. It was the tone of a woman who had decided in real time how she was going to handle this, and the decision was efficiently. Ethan stared at the wall. He noticed absurdly that there was a small scratch in the paint at eye level, a faint diagonal line like someone had once dragged a chair too close. He focused on it. He breathed. 30 seconds. "You can turn around," she said. He did. Aurora Hale stood in the center of her office in a charcoal blazer and a skirt that matched her phone back in her hand. Her expression composed in the way that people who have practiced control for a long time compose it, not quite natural, but close enough that most people wouldn't see the seam. Ethan was not most people. He'd spent his whole life reading rooms, because in his world, reading a room wrong had consequences. He saw the seam. She was rattled. She was hiding it. She was hiding it well. "Your name," she said. It wasn't a question so much as a data retrieval. "Ethan Cole, Maintenance Level 2. The light." "Yes, ma'am. Fixture on the left side. It's a loose housing. I can have it fixed in under 10 minutes. I'll be out of here." She looked at him for a moment in a way that made Ethan feel like he was being read, not evaluated for a threat exactly, but read the way you read a document you weren't expecting, looking for what it actually says beneath the surface. "Fix it," she said. She turned back to her desk. She sat down. She opened her laptop. That was it. Ethan picked up his screwdriver. He stepped back onto the stool. He reached for the fixture. He worked in silence. She worked in silence. The loose housing took 4 screws and a bracket adjustment, 7 minutes, not 10. He tested the switch twice. The flicker was gone. He came down off the stool, packed his kit, and snapped the toolbox shut. "All done," he said. "It won't give you any more trouble." She didn't look up from her laptop. "Thank you, Mr. Cole." He walked to the door. "Mr. Cole." He stopped. Turned. She was looking at him now. Her eyes were dark brown, not the cold, calculating shade he'd expected from company legend, but something more complicated. Tired, maybe, or careful. "I'd appreciate it if this remained private," she said. "The situation. What happened?" Ethan nodded once. "I don't have anyone to tell it to," he said. It came out more honestly than he intended. He saw something flicker across her face, not quite surprise, but adjacent to it. "Good day, Ms. Hale," he said. And he left. In the elevator on the way down, Ethan leaned against the wall and let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding since the door opened. His hands were steady. He was grateful for that. He'd trained himself a long time ago. When things went sideways, go quiet, inside first, fall apart later if you need to. He hadn't fallen apart when his wife Diane left. He hadn't fallen apart when the hospital bill for Lily's ear surgery came in and wiped out everything he'd saved. He wasn't going to fall apart in an elevator over a woman in silk. He pulled out his phone and texted Marcus. "Fixture on 51 is handled. Loose bracket. All good." Marcus replied in under 10 seconds. "In and out. Nobody bothered." Ethan looked at the elevator doors, thought about dark brown eyes that were tired and careful and more human than the building's mythology allowed. "Smooth," he typed back. He didn't think about it for the rest of the day. He told himself that. He told himself that while he was replacing a water pressure valve on the 9th floor, and while he was eating his lunch, a sandwich he'd made at 6 a.m. turkey and mustard, nothing fancy sitting on a concrete stairwell because the break room was too loud on Tuesdays, and while he was riding the freight elevator back down at the end of his shift toolbox between his feet, the city beginning to darken through the small reinforced window above the door. He told himself that all the way to Lily's school, where he arrived 2 minutes before pickup with a juice box in his jacket pocket. Grape always grape, and watched his daughter come running down the steps with her backpack bouncing and her braids flying and her face lit up the way only a 6-year-old's face lights up when they see the person they love most in the world. "Daddy." He caught her mid-air, swung her up, pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Hey, baby girl." "We learned about volcanoes today," she announced into his collar. "Yeah, what did you learn?" "That lava is just really, really, really hot rocks." She pulled back to look at him with the gravity of someone delivering critical intelligence. "And you should never touch it." "Solid advice," he said. She squirmed down out of his arms and grabbed his hand. Already talking about something else, a girl named Priya, who had the best colored pencils in the whole class, and had let her borrow the silver one, and Ethan walked beside her toolbox in his other hand, nodding and asking follow-up questions about the pencils with the full seriousness the topic deserved. This was the thing that mattered. This was the whole point. He did not think about Aurora Hale. He made spaghetti for dinner. He helped Lily with her letters she was working on lowercase g, which she found personally offensive. He read her 2 pages of a book about a very small dragon who wanted to be a librarian. He turned the hall light on. He sat in his kitchen after she fell asleep with a glass of water and the week's bills spread across the table. He did the math. He did it again. He moved some things around. He'd been moving things around so long he knew where every dollar went before it arrived. Lily's summer camp registration was due next month. $240. He didn't have it yet. He looked at his paycheck stub that was pinned to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a fish. Lily had picked it at the dollar store and declared it his. His level 2 rate. The number he'd had for 6 years. He folded the bills back up. He washed his glass. He went to bed. He did not think about the 51st floor. The next morning, Ethan arrived at 6:45, changed into his uniform, grabbed his first work order of the day, 3rd floor HVAC filter rotation. Nothing unusual. At 9:17, his phone buzzed. Not a text. An email. From Human Resources Facilities Operations Division. To Cole. Ethan. Employee. Number 4. 471. Subject role. Reassignment. Executive floor. Support. He read it twice, then a third time. His throat tightened in the specific way that precedes something large. Not fear exactly, but the body's recognition that the next 10 seconds are going to matter. The email was formal, bureaucratic. The language of HR decisions written to be unambiguous. Effective immediately. Ethan Cole, employee, number 4. 471, was being reassigned from general maintenance floors 1 to 30 to direct support. Executive Operations, Floor 51. The position carried a new title, Senior Technical Support Specialist, and a compensation adjustment that, when Ethan worked out the numbers in his head, was 31% above his current rate. 31%. He sat down on a crate in the 3rd floor supply corridor. He read the email again. At the bottom in the notes field, a section usually left blank in reassignment emails, there were 4 words. Requested directly by A.H. He stared at those 4 words for a long time. A.H. He thought about a woman in a charcoal blazer sitting back down at her desk and reopening her laptop. He thought about dark brown eyes that were careful and a little tired. He thought about, "I don't have anyone to tell it to." He thought about how that sentence had come out of his mouth before he'd decided to say it, because the truth sometimes moves faster than the decision to share it. He thought about summer camp, $240. He stood up. He put his phone in his pocket. He picked up his toolbox. He stood in that supply corridor for another 30 seconds, a man who had spent 6 years keeping his head down, doing his job, going home to his daughter, and he felt the full weight of the choice in front of him. Not just the money, though, the money was real. Not just the title, though, the title was something. But the weight of being seen by someone who operated in a world that wasn't his, and the particular danger of what comes next when that happens. He thought about Lily's face on the school steps, about her braids flying. He exhaled. He wrote back to HR. "I accept." He called Marcus from the stairwell. 3 rings, 4. Then, "Cole, what's up? You know about the reassignment?" Silence. Then carefully, "I got notified this morning." "Yeah. You could have told me." "I didn't know until this morning. That's the God's honest truth." Marcus paused. "Listen, Cole, I don't know what happened up on that floor yesterday, and I don't need to. But whatever it was she asked for you specifically, Aurora Hale doesn't ask for anyone specifically. That woman barely uses names." Ethan leaned against the stairwell wall. "So what does that mean?" "It means," Marcus said slowly, "that you're about to find out." A pause. "You're a good technician, Cole. One of my best, and you know I don't throw that around. Whatever this is, just do what you do. Keep your head on right. Don't let the floor change you." Ethan almost said something about how the floor was the least of his concerns. He didn't. "Appreciate it, Marcus." "Go be a ghost," Marcus said, and hung up. Ethan rode the executive elevator for the second time in 2 days. The same walnut paneling, the same cold cedar air. His own reflection in the brushed steel, same uniform, same badge, same man. Except that today, he was going up as something different than what he'd been going down as yesterday. He watched the numbers climb. 30, 40, 50, 51. The doors opened. Derek Holt was standing at the reception desk. When he saw Ethan step off the elevator, something moved behind his eyes. Not quite hostility, but the cousin of it. The kind of expression that belongs to a man who has decided before any facts were gathered that something is wrong. "Mr. Cole," Derek said. His voice was neutral in the way that neutral can be aggressive. "Mr. Holt." Ethan set his toolbox down and rolled his shoulders once. "I understand you've been notified of my reassignment." "We have." Derek picked up a clipboard. They all had clipboards up here, Ethan was noticing, like the 51st floor had a different paper fetish than the rest of the building. "I'll walk you through the protocols for executive floor support. There are quite a few." "I'm ready to learn them." Derek looked at him again with that same complex expression. Then, apparently deciding something, he nodded once. "Follow me," he said. Ethan followed. Down the hall behind a frosted glass panel, in a narrow room that served as the executive floor's technical staging area, a tidy space with spare parts and a workstation. Derek began running through the protocols in the clipped, efficient tone of a man who had memorized a document. Ethan listened. He took notes in the small notebook he kept in his chest pocket, another habit years old. He asked 2 questions, both specific, both practical. Derek answered them with a surprise he tried to conceal. At the end of the briefing, Derek said, "Ms. Hale's schedule today is full through 3 o'clock. Any work in or around her office this morning should be completed before 9:45. "Understood. She values discretion." "So do I," Ethan said. Derek looked at him one more time. Then he left. Ethan set his notebook on the workstation. He looked at his list. He had 4 service requests, already waiting items that had apparently been quietly accumulating on the executive floor, and never adequately addressed a secondary conference room with a faulty projector mount, a private bathroom with inconsistent water temperature, a loose electrical panel cover in the hallway, and a recurring issue with the thermostat calibration in the executive suite itself. 4 problems. Solutions he already knew. He picked up his toolbox. He got to work. He didn't see Aurora Hale that morning. He completed 3 of the 4 items before her 9:45 deadline and flagged the thermostat for a parts order. He documented everything in the technical log the way he always documented, clearly, completely no shortcuts. At 12:30 he was eating his lunch in the technical staging room, same sandwich, same stairwell discipline, applied to a new context when the door opened. He expected Derek. He expected one of the 2 silent suit men from the reception area. Aurora Hale walked in. She was in full CEO mode, now different than she'd been yesterday. Fitted jacket, dark hair pulled back the full weight of the role sitting on her shoulders in a way that looked like it had been there so long she'd forgotten it was weight. She held a tablet in one hand and had her reading glasses pushed up on her head the way people do when they've been moving too fast to take them off. She stopped when she saw him. He stood, not out of deference, just reflex the way his mother had raised him. "Sit down, Mr. Cole," she said. He sat. She looked at the tablet. "You completed 3 of the 4 items on the executive service log this morning. The thermostat needs a specific calibration module. I've submitted the parts request. It should arrive by Thursday." Thursday. She processed this. The previous technicians told me there was nothing wrong with the thermostat. There's a drift in the sensor array. It's reading about 3 degrees higher than the actual room temperature, so the system overcorrects and you get the cold spikes around midday. He paused. "I'm guessing it feels like the office gets colder after 11 p.m. Something shifted in her face. Not surprise, she was too controlled for open surprise, but a kind of a tension that sharpened slightly. "It does," she said. "Thursday," he said again. "I'll fix it." She looked at him. He looked back at her, not challenging, not deferential. Just present. Just honest. "You accepted the reassignment," she said. "I did." "I wasn't certain you would." He thought about that for a moment. About what it would mean to be honest here in this room, on this floor. About what kind of man he wanted to be in a situation like this, a situation that already had more variables than he was used to managing. He decided to be the same man he always was. "The pay adjustment is significant," he said. "I have a daughter to raise. I would have been foolish not to consider it carefully." He paused. "But that's not the only reason I said yes." She waited. "I'm good at this work," he said. "I've always been good at it. I just haven't been where people could see it." He said it without self-pity and without pride, just the plain fact of it. If there's a floor in this building that actually needs someone who's good at what they do, I'd rather be here than somewhere I'm not needed. The room was very quiet. Aurora Hale looked at him for a long moment, in that reading a document way she had, looking for what was beneath the surface of the words. Then she said simply, "Don't let Derek overwhelm you with protocols." "I won't." She turned toward the door. "Ms. Hale." She stopped, turned halfway. "I meant what I said yesterday," Ethan said. "About discretion. What happened, what I walked in on, I haven't said a word. To anyone. And I won't." She held his gaze for 2 full seconds. "I know," she said. And then she was gone. Ethan Cole sat alone in the technical staging room on the 51st floor of Hale Industries Sandwich, in his lap toolbox at his feet. He looked at his hands. At the calluses. At the grease line that lived in the crease of his right thumb, no matter how many times he washed it. He thought about Lily at school right now, probably drawing a volcano. He thought about the scratch in the paint he'd stared at on Aurora Hale's office wall while the world rearranged itself around him. He thought about 4 words at the bottom of an email requested directly by A.H. He didn't know what any of this was going to become. He didn't know what she saw in him, or why she'd made this decision, or what the 51st floor was going to cost him before it was over. He didn't know what Derek Holt was going to do with his particular brand of suspicion, or what the other suits in this world would make of a maintenance man in their midst. He knew how to fix things. He knew how to show up. He knew how to keep his head when everything around him was coming loose. He picked up the other half of his sandwich. He ate. The Thursday parts order arrived on time. Ethan had the thermostat recalibrated by 10:15 in the morning, and when he tested it against the room's actual ambient temperature, the drift was gone dead accurate down to 1/10 of a degree. He documented it in the technical log, filed the old module into the disposal bin, and was already halfway through a secondary task, regrounding a surge protector in the conference suite when Derek Holt appeared in the doorway. Derek watched him work for a moment without saying anything, which Ethan had come to understand was Derek's particular version of making a statement. "You moved the parts order up," Derek said finally. "The distributor had inventory in region. I called directly instead of going through the standard requisition portal. Saved 2 days." Ethan didn't look up from the panel. Figured that was the job. The standard process exists for a reason. The standard process also would have had that thermostat off until Monday. Ethan set down his screwdriver and looked at Derek. Not hard, not soft, just direct. "Ms. Hale's office runs cold every afternoon. I fixed it. If there's a protocol issue, I'll document my reasoning and submit it for review. But the work's done, and it's done right." Derek's jaw moved slightly. He looked at the work order on his clipboard. "Ms. Hale noticed," he said. "It came out like it cost him something." "Good," Ethan said, and turned back to the panel. Derek left without another word. Ethan exhaled through his nose and kept working. He'd dealt with Derek's his entire career, men whose authority was architectural, built into the floor plan of a place, and who felt that authority shift whenever someone came in who didn't recognize the boundaries they'd drawn. The Dereks of the world weren't always malicious. Sometimes they were just scared of change, dressed up as suspicion. Ethan had learned a long time ago that the only way to handle a Derek was the same way you handled a loose connection: steady pressure, proper grounding, and patience. You didn't force it. You let the work speak. He finished the conference suite by noon. He was logging the completion when his phone buzzed, not email, not Marcus, but a number he didn't recognize. A direct line with a 51st floor extension that wasn't in his contacts yet. He answered. "Mr. Cole?" Aurora's voice, measured precise. "Ms. Hale. The thermostat. It's calibrated. You shouldn't get the cold spikes anymore. If you do, let me know within the first week and I'll re-examine the sensor mounting." A pause. Short, but present. "It's already different in here." "Good." Another pause, longer this time. He could hear the background of her world-faint keyboard clicks, the distant murmur of what might have been an assistant's voice. Then she said, "I have a request that's slightly outside normal scope. I'd like your assessment first, rather than a formal work order." Ethan leaned against the workstation. "All right." "The emergency lighting on this floor hasn't been tested in 14 months. I've been told multiple times it's on the schedule. It never happens." "That's a compliance issue," he said. "Those tests are supposed to be quarterly." "I know." "I'll run a full diagnostic today and have a report to you by end of shift. If there are failures, I'll escalate them as critical." "Thank you." And then unexpectedly, before she hung up, "And Mr. Cole, the work you've done this week. It's been noticed, not just by me." She ended the call. Ethan stared at his phone for a second. Then he pocketed it and went to pull the emergency lighting inspection kit from the supply closet, because the work was the work, and sentiment, however genuine, didn't change what needed doing. He found 2 failed emergency units in the east corridor and 1 with a depleted backup battery near the service stairs. By 4 o'clock, all 3 were repaired and documented, and his report was in Aurora's inbox with photographs, part numbers, and a recommended quarterly inspection calendar going forward. Derek received a copy automatically through the technical log. He didn't respond. Ethan rode the freight elevator down. The executive elevator was for executive hours, and his shift ended at 5. And he thought, not for the first time, that this floor was going to be more complicated than fixing thermostats and emergency lights. He could feel it, the way you feel weather before it arrives, something in the air that hadn't settled yet. He was right. It took 9 days for it to break open. The first sign was small. He was in the staging room on a Wednesday afternoon when he heard raised voices through the frosted glass, a sound that didn't belong on the 51st floor, which operated at the volume of a library observed by people who wanted to be taken seriously. He didn't move toward the door. It wasn't his business. He focused on the cable conduit he was rerouting until the voices dropped. But that evening, Lily was doing her homework at the kitchen table, and Ethan was washing dishes, and he was thinking about what he'd overheard without meaning to. One voice had been Derek's. The other voice, lower and more deliberate, he didn't recognize. What he'd caught accidentally through a wall he wasn't trying to listen through were fragments. The board meeting. The projection report. Who has access to those files? And then very clearly Derek's voice. It's a problem, having someone like that up here. Ethan had kept washing dishes. He was a maintenance tech. He fixed things. He didn't involve himself in politics. But he heard that sentence in a way that sat in the back of his chest for the rest of the evening, the way a bad joint in a structure sits in the back of your awareness when you know it's there but haven't decided what to do about it yet. The second sign came 2 days later. He was replacing a panel cover in the East Corridor when he noticed one of the suit men, not Derek, the other one whose nameplate read Paul Greer Senior Analyst, standing near the elevator bay, making a call with his back turned, and his voice lower than it needed to be for a normal conversation. Ethan wouldn't have paid attention, except that Paul Greer's eyes kept moving to the far end of the corridor, to Aurora's office door. Ethan finished his panel cover. He logged it. He said nothing. The third sign was the one that changed everything. It was a Friday afternoon, 3:45, and the floor was in that particular late-week quiet where half the support staff had already mentally left for the weekend. Ethan was in the staging room running a continuity check on a backup power relay when he heard it. Not voices this time, but a sound that every maintenance technician learns to identify before they can explain why the specific metallic groan of a ceiling fixture under unexpected load stress. He was out of the staging room before he'd consciously decided to move. The sound had come from the direction of the main conference room. A large room with a suspended lighting rig track, lighting on a ceiling-mounted rail system, the kind of setup that looked dramatic and modern and required regular inspections that, based on the technical log he'd inherited, had not been conducted in 11 months. He pushed the conference room door open. Aurora Hale was standing at the head of the conference table, alone, a presentation remote in her hand, running through what looked like slide deck preparations for the following week. She was looking at the screen at the far end of the room, and she did not hear the sound, because she was wearing a wireless earpiece, listening to something, a rehearsal track maybe, or a call. She was directly beneath the center section of the suspended lighting rail. Ethan looked up. The center bracket, the one carrying approximately 40 pounds of track lighting and its housing, had a visible separation. Not a crack in the wall mount. A shear at the bracket connection point, the kind that happens when vibration and load and time and inadequate inspection converge on a single moment. He crossed the room in 4 strides. He didn't call out. No time for that, and if she startled and moved the wrong way, it wouldn't help. He got his arm around her shoulders and moved her not roughly, but with the absolute certainty of someone who understood the geometry of what was about to happen, 2 large steps to the right, away from the table's head, out from under the center section. The bracket gave. The lighting rail came down on the left side, held on the right by its secondary mount, swinging in a wide arc that hit the edge of the conference table with a crack that echoed off every hard surface in the room. Track lights scattered. One hit the carpet. One hit the table and skidded off. The fixture housing swung once more and then hung at 45 degrees, suspended by a single wall anchor groaning. Aurora's presentation remote was on the floor. She was standing 2 feet from where she'd been, Ethan's arm still partially around her shoulders. She was looking at the hanging lighting rig, with the expression of someone who has just run the math on what would have happened if the math had been different. Ethan stepped back. He let his arm drop. "Are you all right?" he asked. She turned and looked at him. Her composure, that extraordinary practiced composure, had a fracture in it. Not gone, but cracked the way ice sounds before it gives. She looked at the fixture. She looked at the table edge where it had hit. She looked at him. She stopped. Tried again. "Yes. You need to step out while I secure that mount. It's still a fall risk." "Yes," she said again. She walked toward the door. At the threshold, she stopped without turning around. "Mr. Cole." "Ma'am." "You ran across this room." "Yes." "From the door." "Yes." A pause. "How did you know?" "Sound," he said. "Bracket shear has a specific sound. If you work with structures long enough, you learn to hear what they're telling you." She was quiet for a moment. "Thank you," she said. She left. He worked for 40 minutes, securing the failed mount, flagging the entire lighting rail for immediate replacement, and documenting every detail with the thoroughness of a man who understood that incidents like this become legal matters, and legal matters require clarity. He photographed the sheared bracket. He photographed the impact mark on the table. He noted the date of the last recorded inspection in the log, 11 months, 2 weeks, 4 days, and flagged it as a maintenance failure in the formal incident report. He submitted everything to Building Management Facilities Oversight and separately to Aurora Hale's direct inbox with a cover note that read, "This fixture failure was the result of an inspection gap that predates my assignment to this floor. The full system should be assessed by an independent structural contractor within 48 hours. I've included my contact information if anyone needs clarification on the technical findings. E. Cole." He was packing his kit to leave when Aurora came back. She closed the door behind her. She didn't have her tablet. She didn't have her phone. She stood in the middle of the room that still smelled like disturbed dust and looked at him the way she'd looked at him in the staging room, that reading a document look, searching for what was underneath the surface. "Sit down," she said. "I should get this gear back to, please." He sat. She sat across from him at the conference table, in the chair that was not the head chair, the one a little to the side, a little less formal. Something about that small choice struck him as deliberate. "I've been running this company for 6 years, she said. "Do you know how many times someone in this building has physically moved me out of danger?" He waited. "This is the first time," she said. The fixture was coming down, regardless of who was under it. "That's not the point." She looked at her hands on the table for a moment, an uncharacteristic gesture, private, like she'd forgotten he was watching. "Most people on this floor, Mr. Cole, are very good at telling me what I want to hear. They're very good at managing my schedule and preparing my presentations and making sure I don't see anything that might complicate my day." She paused. "In 6 years, not one of them has walked into a room and run toward me." Ethan looked at her steadily. "I wasn't running toward you, Ms. Hale. I was running toward a structural failure." The corner of her mouth moved. Not a smile, exactly, something more restrained than a smile, but in the same family. "Is that really how you see it?" "That's what happened." "All right." She sat back slightly. "Then let me ask you something. And I want an honest answer, not a professional one." "I'll do my best." "What do you actually think of this floor, of the way things run up here? You've been here almost 2 weeks. You've seen how we operate." Ethan was quiet for a moment. He thought about Derek Holt and his clipboard. He thought about Paul Greer and his turned-back phone calls. He thought about 11 months without a proper inspection on a suspended lighting rig in the most expensive office suite in the building. "I think," he said carefully, "that there's a gap between the image this floor maintains and the reality of how it functions. Things that look maintained aren't. Things that should be attended to get deferred, because nobody wants to be the person who brings a problem to the executive floor." He paused. And I think some of the people up here are more interested in managing your perception than in doing their actual jobs. The room was very quiet. Derek Holt, she said, not a question. I'm not naming names, Ethan said. I'm talking about a dynamic. You're very careful. I've learned to be. She looked at him. Where did you work before Hale Industries? Vargas Commercial Properties, 7 years. Before that, the city's Public Works division for 4. Why did you leave Public Works? My daughter was born. The city shifts didn't work with childcare. Vargas had better hours. He said it plainly without apology. I made the choice that made sense for my family. You've been at level 2 for 6 years. He met her eyes. Yes. Why? The words sat between them. Not unkind, but direct, the kind of direct that expects a real answer. Because, Ethan said, level 3 openings on my division came up twice. The first time I applied and didn't get it. The second time I looked at who was making the decision, and I made a calculation. He paused. I decided that some fights weren't worth what they'd cost me. That keeping my job, keeping my stability, being there for Lily, that mattered more than a title. Was that the right call? He thought about it honestly. I don't know. Maybe. Maybe it was the safe call disguised as the right one. He looked at his hands briefly. You spend enough time making safe choices. Sometimes you stop being able to tell the difference. Aurora Hale was quiet for a long moment. My father built this company, she said. It came without preamble, the way things come out when a person is talking around something they're trying to find their way toward. He built it as a real estate and infrastructure firm, and he ran it for 31 years. When he had his stroke, the board expected the company to go into management transition, outside leadership. They had a list. Her voice was steady, factual, like she'd told the story enough times that she'd removed herself from it. I told them I was taking over. I was 32. I'd been in the company for 4 years, starting from the bottom, because my father insisted on it. I knew every floor of every building we managed. I'd done inspections, I'd reviewed contracts, I'd sat in on tenant negotiations. She paused. They didn't believe I could do it. But you did it, Ethan said. I did it. She looked at him. Do you know what that costs? Not in effort, I understand, but in something else, in constantly having to be something that doesn't leave room for anything human. He looked at her, at the fracture line in the composure that was still there, still visible if you knew where to look. Yeah, he said quietly. I know something about that. Something moved in her expression. Recognition, maybe, or the beginning of it. My father used to say, she continued, that the most dangerous thing in any structure is a problem nobody wants to report. Not because the problem gets worse, though it does, but because everyone who stays silent becomes part of the failure. Ethan thought about 11 months without an inspection. He thought about a sheared bracket and a swinging rail and the sound that precedes collapse. He was right, Ethan said. He usually was. A pause. He would have liked you, I think. The sentence arrived without warning and seemed to surprise her as much as it surprised him. She straightened slightly, the professional composure resettling around her, like a coat she'd let slip off one shoulder. I want a full structural assessment of this floor, she said. Every mounted fixture, every suspended system, every bracket and joint that's supposed to be on a quarterly schedule. I want it done properly, and I want you to oversee it. That's a significant project, Ethan said. I'll need to coordinate with an outside contractor for the structural elements. I know. I'll authorize it. Work with Derek on the scheduling. She paused. Actually work with my assistant Margaret. She'll be more useful. Understood. She stood. He stood. Old reflex again. Mr. Cole. She held out her hand. He shook it. Her grip was firm, the handshake of someone who'd learned early that you had to be. You said something the other day, she said. In the staging room. That you'd been somewhere you weren't needed, and you'd rather be somewhere you were. She held his gaze. I want you to know you're needed here. He nodded once. I'll get the assessment scheduled for next week. Good. She picked up the presentation remote from the floor where it had landed, examined it once, set it on the table. Get home to your daughter, Mr. Cole. He looked at her. How did you... You mentioned her, she said simply. I pay attention. She left. Ethan stood alone in the conference room for a moment, the hanging lighting rig groaning softly above him on one good mount, the city going amber through the windows he was specifically not describing, and he thought about his father, who had worked 30 years in a factory and never once been told by anyone in management that he was needed. He thought about Lily's volcanic intelligence and her lowercase g and her absolute confidence that lava should not be touched. He thought about safe choices and right choices and the space between them. He picked up his toolbox. He turned off the lights. He left the conference room and walked down the 51st floor corridor and pressed the elevator button and waited. Derek Holt stepped out of his office as the elevator arrived. He stopped when he saw Ethan. His eyes moved to the conference room door, which Ethan had left closed behind him. His expression shifted through several channels. Everything all right? Derek asked. The question had two meanings, and they both knew it. Lighting rig failed, Ethan said. I've secured it and submitted the incident report. You'll have a copy in the system. He stepped into the elevator. Have a good weekend, Mr. Holt. The doors closed. Ethan leaned back against the walnut panel and let the building carry him down. He was thinking about what Derek's face had looked like in that fraction of a second before the professional mask came back. Not concern about Aurora, not concern about the structural failure. Something else. Something pinched and calculating. He filed it away. Not in the technical log. In the other place, the one that had kept him alive in rooms where being wrong had consequences. Something on the 51st floor was off. Not the thermostats, not the brackets, not the inspection gaps that had accumulated like debt in a system nobody was minding. Something else was failing. Something structural in a different sense. And Ethan Cole, who had spent his whole life learning to hear what structures told you before they gave way, was starting to hear it. He just didn't know yet what it was going to cost to fix. The structural assessment took 4 days. Ethan coordinated it through Margaret Chen Aurora's executive assistant, a compact, efficient woman in her 50s who communicated exclusively through precise, well-punctuated emails, and who within the first 20 minutes of working with Ethan had decided she approved of him. He could tell because she stopped adding "please review" and "confirm" to every message and started adding "just let me know." In Margaret's language, that was apparently the equivalent of a handshake. The outside contractor, a structural firm called Meridian Group that Hale Industries had a standing contract with, sent 2 engineers on Monday morning. Ethan walked them through the floor himself. He'd already done a preliminary sweep over the weekend on his own time, documenting every suspended fixture and ceiling-mounted system with photographs and measurements. When the Meridian engineers arrived, he handed them a 14-page preliminary report that made both of them stop and read it twice before they said anything. The older engineer, a woman named Sandra Park, looked up from the report and said, "You do this yourself?" "Over the weekend, yeah." "Your maintenance." "Senior Technical Support Specialist," Ethan said. "Executive floor." She looked at the report again. "This is engineer-level documentation." "It's what the job needed," he said. She nodded once in the way that people nod when they're recalibrating what they expected. "All right, let's walk it." They found 6 additional deficiencies beyond the conference room failure, none as immediately critical, but all significant, all representing the accumulated neglect of a floor that had been managed for appearances rather than function. Ethan documented each one as they went cross-referencing his preliminary notes, asking questions, learning. Sandra Park answered his questions without condescension, which he noted and appreciated. By Wednesday, the full report was complete. Ethan submitted it to Aurora's inbox, with Meridian's official findings attached, and his own summary on the cover page, plain language, prioritized by risk with estimated timelines and costs. Aurora's response came 40 minutes later. 3 sentences. Thorough work. I'm sharing this with the board. We'll talk Thursday. Thursday came. Ethan was in the staging room at 8:15 when Margaret appeared in the doorway. "Ms. Hale would like to see you at 9, she said. "Her office." "I'll be there." Margaret started to leave, then turned back. "She also said to tell you, and I'm quoting directly, tell him to bring his honest opinion, not his professional one." Ethan looked at her. "Those are different things." Margaret's expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes did. "On this floor, Mr. Cole, they almost always are." She left. At 9 o'clock, Ethan knocked on Aurora Hale's office door. The proper door, the main door. The one he'd entered through the very first time with a toolbox and a work order that had detonated his life. She said, "Come in." He came in. She was standing at the window, not sitting behind her desk in the full authority of the CEO position, but standing at the window with her arms loosely crossed and her reading glasses in her hand, tapping them lightly against her palm. When she turned around, he saw something in her face he hadn't seen before. Or rather, he'd seen the edge of it in the conference room after the lighting rig came down. But now it was more fully present. She was carrying something. Something heavy and immediate. "Close the door," she said. He did. "Sit down." He sat. She stayed standing, which he'd noticed was her way of processing. She thought better on her feet, moved through problems physically rather than sitting still inside them. "The board reviewed Meridian's assessment this morning," she said. "Good." "It wasn't good." She said it flatly without drama. 3 of the 7 board members used it as a basis for a motion. They're arguing that the condition of the executive floor represents a systemic failure of operational management, meaning my management, and they've formally requested an independent governance review. She paused. That's the polite version of what they said. The impolite version is that they're using a maintenance report to try to push me toward a managed exit. Ethan looked at her steadily. "Is the motion going to succeed?" "Not if I can stop it. But stopping it requires me to understand exactly how this happened, how 11 months of inspection gaps accumulated on the floor that is literally above my head without me knowing." She turned from the window and looked at him. "So I need your honest opinion, not your professional one." He took a breath. "You already know what I'm going to say." "Say it anyway." "Someone on this floor was actively managing what reached you," he said. "Inspection deferrals don't happen accidentally for 11 months. Someone was signing off on reports, or not filing them, or filing versions that didn't reflect reality. That's not negligence. That's a choice." The room was quiet. "Derek," she said. "I'm not confirming a name," Ethan said. "I'm describing a pattern. The pattern points somewhere. To Derek Holt, who has been my executive coordinator for 4 years." She said it with the voice of a woman who had just swallowed something difficult and was deciding whether to let herself feel it. "Who I trusted with operational oversight of this floor. Who I trusted, frankly, with a lot." Ethan said nothing. Sometimes the right contribution to a conversation was silence. Aurora sat down, not behind her desk in the chair across from him, the same side chair she'd taken in the conference room. The less formal one. "My father used to say the most dangerous hire you can make is someone who's good at managing up," she said. "Someone who makes you feel informed while controlling what you actually see." She set her reading glasses on the table. "I always thought I was too careful for that. I thought I read people well enough." "You read people fine," Ethan said. "But you were operating on information that was being filtered. That's not a failure of your judgment, it's a failure of your system." She looked at him. "You're being generous." "I'm being accurate. There's a difference." Something shifted in her expression. You do that a lot. Do what? Make a distinction between what something appears to be and what it actually is. She studied him. Where does that come from? He thought about it for a moment. Really thought rather than reaching for the safe answer. My mother, he said. She cleaned houses for 25 years. Other people's houses. She used to come home and tell me she'd say, Ethan, people think their house is clean when company's coming. But I know every house from the inside. I know what's behind the stove and under the bathroom cabinet and in the back of the hall closet. He paused. She said the truth of a place is what it looks like when nobody's performing. Aurora was quiet for a moment. She sounds like a remarkable woman. She was, he said. She died 3 years ago. I'm sorry. Thank you. He said it simply. No deflection, no rush past it. She picked up her glasses and held them, turning them in her hands. My mother left when I was 11. My father never remarried. He raised me the same way he'd have raised a son, which meant he expected everything and explained nothing and showed his approval by giving you more responsibility. She said it without self-pity and without resentment, just the plain biography of it. Which means I spent most of my life being competent and very little of it being cared for. Ethan didn't say anything for a moment. He understood the particular architecture of what she'd just described, the way a childhood shaped by high expectation and low tenderness could build someone extraordinary and leave something unfilled at the center of it. Is that why you trust performance over people? He asked. She looked at him sharply. Not offended, arrested. The look of someone who has heard something true. Yes, she said. After a pause, probably. That makes sense, he said. And it also explains why someone like Derek was able to operate the way he did. Because he performed exceptionally. He managed up exactly the way your father warned against, and he knew you'd evaluate the performance rather than question the man behind it. She sat with that for a moment. He watched her process it, the way she went quiet and still when thinking the opposite of the movement she used when carrying something emotionally. When she was thinking hard, Aurora Hale went very, very still. What would you do? She asked. In my position. I'd pull every filing record from the last 18 months that passed through Derek's review. Inspection logs, vendor communications, maintenance sign-offs. I'd compare them against the actual state of this floor as documented by Meridian. Wherever there's a gap between what was reported and what actually existed, that's your evidence. He paused. And then I'd talk to Margaret. Aurora raised an eyebrow. Margaret knows everything that moves through this floor, Ethan said. She's been your assistant for how long? 9 years. 9 years. And she's been watching the same patterns I've been watching for 3 weeks. He met her eyes. She hasn't said anything because nobody asked her. Aurora looked at him for a long time. Then she stood, picked up her phone, and pressed a button. Margaret, can you come in, please? Margaret appeared in under 30 seconds. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her and looked at the two of them, at the arrangement of chairs, at the absence of tablets and agendas, at the quality of quiet in the room, and her face told Ethan everything he'd suspected. She'd been waiting for this conversation for a long time. Sit down, Margaret, Aurora said. Margaret sat. I need to ask you some things, Aurora said. And I need you to answer as if your job doesn't depend on the answers. Margaret's hands folded in her lap. My job depends on my loyalty to you, Ms. Hale, not to anyone else on this floor. Then tell me about the inspection logs. Margaret looked at her steadily. Which ones would you like me to start with? What came out over the next 40 minutes was the kind of thing that happens when someone who has been keeping a careful record in their head because they had the intelligence to know it might matter someday is finally given permission to open it. Margaret didn't editorialize. She didn't perform outrage. She laid out what she'd observed with the same precision she brought to scheduling and correspondence dates, documents, discrepancies. Inspection reports that had been filed in the system under Derek's authorization, with dates that didn't match the actual visits she'd scheduled and confirmed. Vendor invoices for maintenance services that had been marked complete and weren't. A safety audit from 7 months ago that existed as a completed document in the system, and as far as Margaret could determine, had never actually been conducted. When she finished, the office was very quiet. Aurora sat behind her desk. Now she'd moved there sometime in the middle of Margaret's account, not for authority, but for the physical anchor of it, the solidity of a surface in front of her when the ground was shifting. "Why didn't you come to me?" Aurora asked. Her voice was quiet, not accusatory. Margaret looked at her hands briefly. "Because twice in the last 2 years, when I raised concerns about operational irregularities, I was told by Mr. Holt in your name that Ms. Hale prefers consolidated reporting and that individual observations should go through the appropriate channels before reaching her office." She paused. "I realize now I should have questioned whether that instruction actually came from you." "It didn't," Aurora said. "I know that now." Aurora closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. Then she opened them. "Thank you, Margaret. This is going to require some formal documentation. I'll need you to write up everything you just told me, date specifics, and send it directly to legal. Not through the standard workflow, directly from your personal email." "I'll do it this afternoon," Margaret said. She stood, looked once at Ethan, a look that carried something like gratitude, and left. The door closed. Aurora looked at Ethan. "He used my name," she said. "He told people he was acting in my name, and I didn't know." "Yes." She stood again, the movement processing the thinking done in motion. "The board is meeting again in 10 days. Whatever Derek's involvement is, whoever else on this board might be connected to him, they're going to use that window to formalize the governance review. If I go into that meeting without getting ahead of this, I lose the narrative. What do you need?" She stopped moving and looked at him. The question seemed to catch her. He'd asked it the way a person asks it when they actually intend to do whatever the answer is, not rhetorical, not performative. "Just what do you need?" "I need the documentation you built for Meridian," she said. "Your original assessment. The photographs, the timeline of inspection gaps, everything with dates and references. I need it formatted so a board member with no technical background can look at it and understand precisely what was and wasn't done and when. I can have that to you by end of day tomorrow. And I need you to be available to present it if I ask you to." He was quiet for a moment. "Present it. To the board. Possibly, not the full board, possibly to the independent governance reviewer. Possibly to legal. I don't know yet." She looked at him. "Is that too much to ask?" He thought about a level 2 badge and a freight elevator. He thought about the conversation with Marcus. Don't let the floor change you. He thought about what it had cost his mother to know the inside of other people's houses while nobody knew the inside of hers. "No," he said. "That's the job." She nodded. Then again, that small unguarded thing moved through her expression before the professional face resettled. "I know this isn't what you signed up for when you accepted the reassignment." "I signed up to fix what's broken on this floor," he said. "Turns out not all of it is in the ceiling." For the first time, the actual first time, not the almost smile in the staging room, Aurora Hale smiled. It was a brief thing, contained but real. The kind of smile that arrives unexpectedly and leaves before it can be examined. "Get me that report," she said. "Tomorrow," he said. He left her office and walked down the corridor toward the staging room, and stopped in the hallway when he saw Derek Holt coming the other direction. Derek had a coffee cup in one hand and his phone in the other, and he was reading something on his screen, and for a half second neither of them said anything. Then Derek looked up. His expression moved through several things very quickly. Ethan watched it happen, the recognition, the calculation, the decision about what face to put on top of both of those. "Cole," Derek said, pleasantly, professionally. "Holt," Ethan said. "You came out of her office. I did. Meeting? Work discussion, Ethan said. Derek nodded. His eyes didn't match the nod. She keeps pulling you in for those. Turns out there's a lot of work to discuss, Ethan said. He kept his voice easy, his face neutral. He'd learned a long time ago that the most dangerous thing you could do with a man like Derek was let him know how much you knew. Not because confrontation was wrong, but because timing mattered. You didn't expose a bad joint before you had the replacement ready. Right, Derek said. He took a sip of his coffee. Well, let me know if you need anything. Protocols, resources, whatever. I appreciate that, Ethan said. He went to the staging room. He closed the door. He sat down at the workstation and opened his documentation files and began the work of translating 3 weeks of technical findings into something that a boardroom could understand. He worked until 6. Margaret sent him a text at 5:15. She had his number from the coordination work that said simply, "Done. Sent to legal at 4:47. He sent back, "Good." He got to Lily's aftercare program at 6:28 minutes before the cutoff. She was the last kid left in the room, sitting at a table with a piece of paper in front of her, drawing something with absolute concentration that she did not look up from when he came in. "Hey, baby," he said. "1 second," she said. She was 6, and she had no concept of the fact that he'd just spent 9 hours inside a political crisis on the 51st floor of a major corporation, and he loved her for it completely. He sat down at the little table across from her. The chair was designed for a person approximately a third of his size. He folded himself into it. She looked up. She held up the paper. It was a drawing of a building, a very tall building with many floors. At the top floor there were 2 stick figures. One was labeled Dad in shaky uppercase letters. The other one, taller with what appeared to be a triangle-shaped outfit and long hair, had no label. "That's you," Lily said, pointing to the smaller figure. "I see that. And that's the big boss lady." He looked at her. "Where did you hear about the big boss lady?" Lily gave him the look that 6-year-olds reserve for questions they find slightly beneath them. "You told me you got moved to the top floor with the boss." "I said I got reassigned to the executive floor." "Same thing." She pulled the paper back and studied it. "Is she nice?" He thought about that for a moment. "She's complicated," he said. Lily processed this. "Miss Drummond is complicated," she said with authority. "She's strict, but she gives extra star stickers when you try hard." She looked at the drawing. "Maybe the big boss lady is like that." Ethan looked at his daughter, at her braids, and her serious little face, and her absolute confidence that she had correctly diagnosed the situation. "Maybe," he said. She folded the drawing and handed it to him. "You can keep it," she said, "for your new office." He took it. "I don't have an office." "You can put it in your toolbox." He folded it carefully and put it in his chest pocket against his heart, which was probably a little much and which he did not care about at all. He carried her bag. She held his hand. They walked to the car in the evening air that was turning cool. "Daddy," she said. "Yeah." "Are you going to be okay at the new place?" He looked down at her. She was looking straight ahead, watching where she was walking with the careful attention of a child who'd learned to step around puddles. "What makes you ask that?" She shrugged, small shoulders moving. "You've been quiet different," she said. Not quiet period, quiet different. Like she'd noticed a change in the quality of his silence and had been sitting with it the way he sat with the sound a structure makes before it tells you what's wrong. He squeezed her hand. "I think so," he said. "Yeah. I think I'm going to be okay." She nodded like that settled it. They reached the car. He buckled her in. He got in the driver's seat and pulled out of the parking lot into the evening, the city spread out in front of them, going gold and purple as the light changed. And he thought about a structural assessment that was due tomorrow, and a board meeting in 10 days, and a man who'd been filing false reports in someone else's name. He thought about a drawing in his chest pocket. Two stick figures at the top of a building. He thought about what Lily had said. Quiet different. She wasn't wrong. Something in him was different, not loud about it, not dramatic, not the kind of different that announces itself, but present, real. The kind of change that happens when a person who has spent years in the shadows is asked to step into something that requires them to be fully themselves and discovers to their own surprise that they are fully prepared. He'd spent 6 years keeping his head down. He'd told himself it was for Lily, and it was for Lily that part was true. But it was also for something else. It was for the safety of not being seen, of not being the one who walks into a room and changes the room's temperature, of not being the person whose presence requires anyone to reckon with anything uncomfortable. The 51st floor had ended that. Not because Aurora Hale had chosen him for some grand purpose, not because destiny had intervened in the form of a broken light on a Tuesday morning, but because a structure had been failing slowly, invisibly, through the accumulated pressure of small compromises, and he was the person who'd been put in the room when it finally made the sound that precedes collapse. And he'd heard it, because that's what he did. That's what he'd always done. He heard what structures told you before they gave way. The question now was whether he was ready for what came next, because the sound he was hearing from the 51st floor wasn't done yet. Derek Holt hadn't gotten where he was through incompetence. The board members moving against Aurora weren't acting on opportunism alone. The inspection gaps and the false reports and the managed information, those were symptoms. Something underneath them was still building pressure. And Ethan Cole driving his daughter home through a city going gold, with a drawing in his chest pocket and a report due tomorrow, understood that whatever was underneath it was going to surface before the board meeting in 10 days. The only question was whether it would surface on Aurora's terms or someone else's. He drove. Lily sang something from school, low and tuneless, and entirely confident. The city moved past the windows. He was ready. The report was in Aurora's inbox by 8:15 the next morning, 45 minutes before Ethan's shift officially started. He'd finished it at 11 the previous night at his kitchen table, after Lily was asleep with the bills still stacked at the edge of the table where he'd pushed them to make room. He'd gone over it 3 times, not for technical accuracy, which he'd had locked from the first draft, but for clarity. For the kind of plain language precision that makes a document undeniable. Every gap in the inspection record cross-referenced against the corresponding date in the system log. Every false completion noted against Margaret's first-hand account. Every photograph labeled with location date of discovery and Meridian's independent confirmation. When he was satisfied, he sent it. Then he sat in his kitchen for a while in the quiet that belongs to late nights after children are asleep, and he thought about nothing in particular, which was his way of thinking about everything. Aurora replied at 6:52 in the morning. He was in the car line at Lily's school when his phone buzzed. "This is exactly what I needed. Legal has it. Don't come to the staging room first thing, come directly to my office at 8:30. Things have moved overnight." Things have moved overnight. He read it twice. He watched Lily disappear through the school's front doors. Backpack bouncing, braids flying without a backward glance because she was 6 and confident and trusted the world to stay where she'd left it. He wished briefly for that particular kind of certainty. He drove to Hale Industries. He rode the executive elevator. He knocked on Aurora's office door at 8:29. "Come in." She was behind her desk this time, fully behind it, CEO posture, the full weight of the position in the set of her shoulders. But her face told a different story. She'd been awake for a while. There were things behind her eyes that hadn't been processed yet, still raw and moving. Margaret was already in the room, standing near the bookshelf with a legal pad. Sandra Park from Meridian was sitting in one of the chairs across from the desk. And there was a man Ethan didn't recognize, mid-50s, silver-haired, in a charcoal suit that cost more than Ethan's monthly rent, sitting very still in the other chair, with the quiet of a person who is accustomed to rooms arranging themselves around him. "Mr. Cole," Aurora said. "Sit down. I'll make introductions quickly because we don't have much time." She gestured to the silver-haired man. This is Richard Farrow. He's the independent governance reviewer the board appointed. He arrived this morning early, which tells you what kind of board motion we're dealing with." She paused. "Richard, this is Ethan Cole, Senior Technical Support Specialist. He's the one who produced the structural assessment." Farrow looked at Ethan with the evaluative gaze of a man whose entire profession consisted of determining what was real and what was performed. "The assessment is thorough," he said. His voice was the kind of quiet that didn't need volume. "Better documented than most things I see from licensed engineers." "Thank you," Ethan said. "You were reassigned to this floor 3 weeks ago." 22 days ago, yes. At Ms. Hale's specific request." "That's correct." Farrow looked at Aurora briefly, then back at Ethan. "And in 22 days, you identified 11 months of falsified maintenance records, 6 structural deficiencies, and a systematic pattern of information control that bypassed the CEO's direct oversight." "The deficiencies were there before I arrived," Ethan said. "I just documented what was already true." "Why do you think no one documented it before you?" Ethan held the man's gaze. "Because documentation requires proximity to the truth, and proximity to the truth on this floor was being managed." Farrow was quiet for a moment. Then he wrote something on the legal pad he was holding. Ethan couldn't see what it was. "All right," Farrow said. "Farrow." He stood, which caused the room's energy to shift. "Ms. Hale, I need to begin my formal review interviews this morning. I'll start with Ms. Chen." He nodded at Margaret. "Mr. Cole, I'll want to speak with you this afternoon, 3 o'clock." "I'll be here," Ethan said. Farrow and Margaret left together. Sandra Park from Meridian stood and shook Aurora's hand, then Ethan's, and followed. The door closed. Aurora leaned back in her chair. She pressed 2 fingers to her temple for exactly 3 seconds, a gesture so human and unguarded that Ethan felt he'd walked in on something private again, though in a completely different way than the first time. "Derek resigned this morning," she said. Ethan didn't react. He'd been waiting for something to surface before the board meeting. This was earlier than he'd expected. "Voluntarily?" he asked. "That's the interesting question." She dropped her hand from her temple. "He sent a resignation letter to HR at 5:47 this morning. Personal reasons. Effective immediately." She looked at Ethan. "He didn't copy me." "What does legal say?" "Legal says it looks like someone who knew what was coming and decided getting ahead of it was better than being caught in it." She paused. "Which means someone told him. Told him the documentation existed, told him Farrow was arriving this morning, told him the window was closing." Ethan thought about Paul Greer, senior analyst, standing at the elevator bay with his back turned, and his voice low. About the fragment he'd overheard through a wall 3 weeks ago. "It's a problem having someone like that up here." "Paul Greer," he said. Aurora looked at him sharply. "I don't have evidence," Ethan said immediately. "Just a pattern. Greer has been uncomfortable since I arrived. I've seen him make calls he didn't want overheard. 2 weeks ago I heard him and Derek having a conversation that—" He stopped, chose his words. That didn't sound like a conversation between 2 employees discussing their jobs. What did it sound like? Like 2 people managing a shared problem. He paused. "When I put that together with Derek resigning before Farrow could formally interview him, someone got to Derek last night. Someone who knew what was in that documentation before it went to legal." "I sent the documentation to 3 people," Aurora said. Her voice had gone very quiet. "Legal, Farrow's office, and my own external counsel." She stopped. "And you?" "And you," he confirmed. The weight of that settled between them. "It wasn't your external counsel," Ethan said. It wasn't a question, but he said it gently. "No, it wasn't." She stood again, moving processing. "David Reyes in legal has been with this company 11 years. I would stake—" She stopped herself, inhaled. "I would have staked everything on David." She looked at Ethan. "The same way I staked everything on Derek." "Is there anyone on this floor you haven't staked everything on?" he asked. The question was direct, but not unkind. She looked at him for a long moment. "You," she said. "I've been here 22 days. "I know." Something moved in her face, not quite a smile, not quite pain, somewhere between the two. Maybe that's the point. He looked at her steadily. "Ms. Hale, Aurora." He used her first name for the first time, and neither of them acknowledged it, and both of them registered it. "I need you to hear me clearly right now. You're at the center of something that is moving faster than you can track it alone. Derek was the face of it, but Derek is gone, and whoever told him to run is still in this building." He paused. "You need to decide in the next few hours who you actually trust, and it cannot be based on tenure or history or performance record. It has to be based on what you know about who that person is." She looked at him for a long time. "I know who you are," she said quietly. "Then let me help you think through this." She sat back down, not behind the desk this time, in the side chair. He pulled the other chair around so they were facing each other at the same level. Margaret's legal pad was on the table between them. He picked up the pen. "Walk me through your board," he said. "All 7 members, what you know about each one." "Ethan, that's—" "I know it's not maintenance work," he said. "You can tell me to stop any time, but right now you need someone who doesn't have a stake in your company's politics to help you see what you're too close to see clearly." He held the pen. "Walk me through them." She looked at him. Then she started talking. It took 40 minutes. He didn't write much, a name here, a word there, more a map than a record. He asked questions that she initially found too blunt, and then found one by one that she couldn't answer the way she'd intended. Questions like, does he tell you what he knows or what he thinks you want to hear? And when she pushes back on, does it ever cost her anything? And if he needed to choose between protecting his position and protecting you, which one has he actually chosen historically? By the end, they had 3 names on one side and 4 on the other. 3, she said, looking at the paper. "I have 3. 3 is enough to control emotion," Ethan said. "If you can get in front of the 4 on the other side before the board meeting, and you have Pharaoh's preliminary findings supporting your version of events." "I need David's leak confirmed first," she said. "If I walk into that meeting and Reyes has shared privileged communications with board members who are acting against me and I can't prove it." "Margaret," Ethan said. She looked at him. "Margaret schedules everything that moves through this floor," he said. "She also, as she demonstrated yesterday, has been paying very close attention for a very long time. Ask her if she's seen any communication between Reyes and the board members that moved faster than it should have." He paused. "And ask her if Derek and Reyes had any meetings in the last month that weren't on the official calendar." Aurora stared at him. "How do you think like this?" she said. "I fix things," he said simply. "You have to understand the whole system before you touch anything. You have to know which parts are load-bearing before you decide what to move." She picked up her phone and called Margaret. He excused himself to give her privacy and went to the staging room. He sat at the workstation. He noticed his hands were completely steady, and he wasn't sure what to make of that, whether it meant he was genuinely calm, or whether he'd gone somewhere beyond the place where shaking happens. He made himself a cup of coffee from the small machine on the counter. He drank it. He looked at the technical log open on the screen in front of him, all the service requests completed and pending the documentary record of the work he'd done in 22 days, on a floor that had been breaking for far longer than that. He thought about his daughter's drawing in his chest pocket. 2 stick figures at the top of a very tall building. At 10:40 the staging room door opened and Paul Greer walked in. He closed the door behind him. He was wearing a jacket and carrying his own coffee, and his posture was the particular posture of a man who has decided to be casual and is working at it. He looked around the staging room as if he'd never been in it before, which Ethan suspected was true. "Cole," he said. "Greer." Ethan didn't stand. Paul Greer sat down in the chair on the other side of the workstation, uninvited. He set his coffee down. He looked at Ethan with the look of a man who had decided to try something. "Hell of a week," Greer said. "It's Friday," Ethan said. "The week's not over." "Right." Greer smiled, the professional kind, the kind that doesn't involve the eyes. "Derek's gone. It's a surprise. You hear about that?" "I did." "Crazy. 4 years, and then just personal reasons." Greer shook his head like a man performing mild disbelief. "These things happen, I guess." Ethan looked at him without expression. "They do." Greer leaned forward, slightly, elbows on the station surface. "Listen, I just want to say, I think you've done good work up here. The structural stuff, the report. Nobody was expecting something that thorough." "I do thorough work," Ethan said. Right you do." A pause. "I guess I'm just wondering, and this is just a personal conversation, nothing official, whether all that documentation, the stuff that went to legal, whether all of it was necessary, whether some of it maybe was more than the situation required." He looked at Ethan carefully. "Because sometimes, the more you dig, the more gets disturbed. And some things, some situations are better handled quietly, internally." Ethan put his coffee down. He looked at Paul Greer with the full, unhurried attention of a man who has all the time in the world and absolutely no intention of going where this conversation wants to take him. "Are you asking me to tell you what's in the legal documentation?" Ethan said. Greer's expression flickered. No, I'm just..." "Are you asking me to speak to the approach of that documentation, to suggest that it was excessive?" "I'm having a conversation." "Paul." Ethan said the name quietly. "I've been in this building for 6 years. I've been on this floor for 22 days. And in 22 days, I've watched you make 3 phone calls you didn't want anyone to hear. I've watched you position yourself near the elevator every time someone comes to see Ms. Hale. And I've watched your face when Derek Holt's name comes up." He paused. "I don't know exactly what you did, but I know what you're doing right now, and I want you to hear me very clearly. Whatever you came in here looking for, I don't have it for you." Greer stared at him. The professional casualness had dropped. Underneath it was something tight and cold. "You're out of your depth, Cole," he said quietly. "Maybe," Ethan said. "But I'm not out of my integrity. And right now, that's the only depth that matters." Greer picked up his coffee. He stood. He looked at Ethan one more time with that cold, calculating thing in his eyes. Then he left. Ethan sat very still for a moment after the door closed. He picked up his phone and sent Aurora a text. "Greer just came to the staging room, fishing for information about the legal documentation. You need to tell Pharaoh." Her reply came in under a minute. "I know." Margaret confirmed 2 off-calendar meetings between Greer and Reyes in the last 3 weeks. "Pharaoh is aware. Stay where you are." He stayed where he was. At 12:30, Margaret appeared in the staging room doorway with a sandwich and a bottle of water, which she set on the workstation without comment or ceremony. "You didn't eat," she said. He looked at the sandwich. Turkey and mustard somehow, which he had not mentioned to anyone. "How did you know?" "You make the same thing every day," she said. "I've seen your lunch for 3 weeks." She turned to leave, then stopped. "Mr. Cole." "Margaret." She turned around. In 9 years of working for Aurora Hale, he guessed that Margaret Chen had probably seen more than she'd said on approximately 900 occasions. But something in her face now was different, less the executive assistant, more the woman. "She doesn't let people in," Margaret said. "In 9 years I've seen her trust 3 people completely, her father, her external counsel, Anna Reyes, no relation to David." She paused. "And now it seems you." She met his eyes. "I don't say that to put pressure on you. I say it because I think you should know what you're carrying." He held her gaze. "Thank you, Margaret." She nodded once. She left. He ate the sandwich. He thought about what he was carrying, and whether he'd signed up for it, and whether that question even mattered at this point. The honest answer was no. He hadn't signed up for any of this when he'd accepted the reassignment email. He'd signed up for thermostats and brackets and emergency lighting tests. He'd signed up for being good at his job in a place where being good at the job would matter. But the job, it turned out, was bigger than its title. He was thinking about that when his phone rang. Not Aurora, not Marcus. A number he didn't recognize, no extension, no name, just 10 digits. He answered. "Mr. Cole." The voice was male, deliberate, with the careful enunciation of someone who'd decided exactly what they were going to say before dialing. "My name isn't important. What's important is that you're in a position right now that's going to cause you serious professional harm if you don't recalibrate." Ethan set the sandwich down. "I'm listening," he said. "The documentation you submitted to legal, it's going to be characterized as the work of a maintenance technician who exceeded his scope and created a paper trail that serves the CEO's personal agenda rather than the company's interests. That's a narrative that's already being constructed. By the time the board meeting happens, you're going to be the story, not the inspection gaps, not the structural failures. You." A pause. A man with no legal standing, no executive authority, and a very easy-to-challenge professional background who somehow ended up in the CEO's private office and has been operating far outside his job description ever since. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Outside his job description. The phrase was specifically chosen because it pointed back to the very first day, to the very first door, to a moment that this person clearly knew about. "Who are you?" Ethan said. "Someone who can make this go away," the voice said, quietly, "without any damage to your employment record, your finances, or your custody situation." Custody situation. The words landed like a weight dropped from height. Lily's face moved through his mind, her braids, her drawings, her absolute trust in the solidity of the world he'd built for her. His jaw tightened. His hand tightened around the phone. He breathed once deliberately through his nose. "I'm going to say something to you," Ethan said. His voice was very quiet and very steady. "And I want you to hear every word of it." Silence on the line. "I have a daughter," Ethan said. "She's 6. She draws pictures and asks me if I'm okay, and believes that lava should not be touched. Everything I have done in my life has been for her every safe choice, every swallowed ambition. Every morning I showed up and did my job without asking for anything more than what I earned." He paused. "And you just used her to threaten me." "Mr. Cole, I'm not finished." He said it the way he said things when he meant them completely. "I've spent 22 days on the 51st floor of this building watching men like you operate. Men who are very comfortable in power and very frightened of accountability. Men who confuse silence with complicity and think that anyone who doesn't have a corner office can be purchased or scared back into line." He kept his voice level. "Whatever you think you know about me, whatever file you've built, whatever narrative you're constructing, understand this. I documented the truth. That documentation is already where it needs to be, and there is nothing you can say to me that changes what is true." Silence. "You should think carefully," the voice said. But something in it had shifted. The deliberate certainty was thinner now, like a surface that had been walked on too hard. "I have," Ethan said. "Get a lawyer." He ended the call. He sat in the staging room with his phone in his hand and his half-eaten sandwich in front of him and the technical log glowing on the screen, and he felt the full reality of what had just happened settle into his chest. They'd mentioned Lily. They'd reached into the most protected part of his life and used it as a lever, and whoever had authorized that call had made a calculation about what kind of man Ethan Cole was, what his price was, where his limit was, what it would take to make him fold. They were wrong. He had been folding for 6 years. Quietly, professionally, strategically, for good reasons, for real reasons, for Lily. But there was a difference between choosing to stay low and being forced there. And the moment someone reached for his daughter to do the forcing, they had crossed a line that Ethan Cole didn't have a professional response for. He had something older than professional. Something that lived in the place where his mother had told him the truth of a place is what it looks like when nobody's performing. He called Aurora. She picked up on the second ring. "What's wrong?" "I just received a threatening phone call," he said. "Anonymous. They referenced the documentation, my professional standing, and my custody situation." A pause. Sharp and full. "Lily." They mentioned it generally, as a pressure point. "Ethan." Her voice had changed, not to softness exactly, but to something direct and personal, the professional layer stripped out of it. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," he said. And then, because she'd asked the real question and he owed her the real answer, "I'm angry." "Good," she said. "Stay angry. I need you at 3 with Pharaoh. Bring everything including what just happened." A pause. "And Ethan, I'm sorry. This is what's happening to you right now is because of me, because of what I asked you to do." "You didn't ask me to be honest," he said. "I already was that when I walked in." She was quiet for a moment. 3 o'clock, she said. 3 o'clock, he confirmed. He put the phone down. He finished the sandwich because he was going to need the energy, and because wasting Margaret's consideration felt wrong. He straightened the workstation. He opened the technical log and began documenting with time and date and as much verbatim recall as he could reconstruct the content of the call he'd just received. Because that was the job. That's what you did when a structure was failing and pressure was building and the moment of collapse was getting closer. You documented the truth. You made it undeniable. You made sure that when the weight finally came down, there was a record of every crack that had led there. He'd been doing it his whole life in every building on every floor. The 51st was just the one where it mattered most. He saved the file. He checked the time. 2 hours and 11 minutes until 3 o'clock. He picked up his toolbox, old reflex, old comfort, and went to do the work that was waiting. Because there was always work waiting. And because Ethan Cole did not know how to sit still inside a crisis when there were things that needed to be fixed. The floor was quiet. The corridor was empty. Somewhere behind a closed door, Richard Farrow was asking Margaret Chen questions she'd been waiting 9 years to answer honestly. Ethan walked the length of the 51st floor, the way he always walked it, eyes moving, ears open, reading what the structure was telling him. What it was telling him now was that everything was about to break open, and he was going to be standing in the room when it did. Richard Farrow ran his interviews like a man who had spent 30 years learning that the truth doesn't hide, it just waits for the right question. By 2:15 he had spoken to Margaret, to Sandra Park, to 2 members of Aurora's legal team, and to 3 board members who had called him separately and nervously over the course of the morning. Ethan knew this because Margaret had been sending him quiet updates through the afternoon, not gossip, not speculation, but the plain logistical facts of what was moving and where. It was the most useful thing anyone had done for him all day. At 2:50, Ethan walked to Aurora's office. He knocked. She said, "Come in." He came in, and the room had changed in its atmosphere the way rooms do when something irreversible has already happened, and everyone present knows it. Farrow was seated across from Aurora's desk. Aurora was behind it this time, fully deliberately in the posture of a woman who had decided that this was her room and her company, and she was done conducting business from the side chair. She looked like herself in a way she hadn't quite looked for the past several days, still carrying weight, but carrying it upright. "Mr. Cole," Farrow said. "Sit down." Ethan sat. Farrow opened the legal pad on his knee. "I want to cover 3 things. First, the documentation you submitted. Second, the conversation you had with Paul Greer this morning. Third, the phone call you received at 12:41. He looked up. "You've already written up the call." Time-stamped verbatim, as I could reconstruct it, filed in the technical log and emailed to Ms. Hale's inbox at 1:17. Ethan said. Farrow wrote something. "Good. I'll need a formal statement." He looked at Ethan squarely. "Mr. Cole, I want to be direct with you about where my review stands. What I've found in the last 6 hours is consistent with what your documentation describes: a pattern of systematic information control that operated specifically to limit the CEO's visibility into this floor's actual operational condition and to create a paper record of compliance that did not reflect reality. He paused. I've also found evidence suggesting that at least 2 board members were receiving information from Derek Holt through an intermediary, information that was being used to build a case for a governance review that was in effect manufactured. The room was quiet. Manufactured, Aurora said. It wasn't surprise in her voice. It was the specific exhaustion of having suspected something and having it confirmed. The motion for a governance review was initiated 3 weeks ago, Farrow said, which is the same week I reassigned Mr. Cole to this floor, Aurora said. Yes. Farrow looked between them. Someone understood that a competent independent presence on this floor was a threat to what they'd built. The reassignment appears to have accelerated a timeline that was already in motion. He set the legal pad on his knee. Mr. Cole, I want to ask you something directly. When you documented the inspection gaps and submitted that report, did you understand what it might set in motion? Ethan thought about that honestly. I understood it was going to disturb something, he said. I didn't know what. I documented it because it was true, and because the floor had a structural safety failure that had already endangered someone. The politics of it, I wasn't calculating that. But you weren't surprised by what followed. I was trained to recognize when a system is failing, Ethan said. When it made noise, I listened. Farrow looked at him for a long moment in a way that reminded Ethan unexpectedly of the engineers from Meridian who had read his preliminary report twice before they spoke. The look of someone recalibrating an expectation. All right, Farrow said. He closed the legal pad. Ms. Hale, here is where I stand. My preliminary findings do not support the governance review motion. The motion was based on a characterization of executive floor operations that the evidence does not sustain. The failures of operational management on this floor were the result of deliberate concealment by personnel acting against the CEO's interests, not the CEO's failure of oversight. He paused. I'll have a formal preliminary report to the full board by tomorrow morning. The board meeting should proceed as scheduled. I'll be present. Aurora held his gaze, and the board members who were receiving information from Holt. That's a matter for your legal team, and depending on what that review finds, potentially regulators. Farrow stood. I'd recommend having your external counsel present at the board meeting. He looked at Ethan briefly. I'd also recommend having Mr. Cole present. Ethan looked up. Me. You produced the foundational documentation. If the motion is challenged, and it will be having the person who built the record in the room, prevents the record from being mischaracterized. Farrow said it with the practicality of a man for whom this was simply logic. You're a fact witness, Mr. Cole, not a political one. That's valuable. He shook Aurora's hand. He shook Ethan's. He left. The office was very quiet. Ethan and Aurora sat in the silence for a moment, in the way people sit in silence after something large has passed through a room, and they're both checking that all their parts are still where they left them. How are you doing? Ethan asked. She looked at him. The question seemed to reach her in the same way it had in the conference room after the lighting rig came down, like something she hadn't been expecting and had to adjust for. Honestly, she said, always. She exhaled a real breath, not a managed one. I'm relieved. And I'm furious. And I'm... She stopped. Tried again. I trusted Derek with the operational function of this floor for 4 years. I trusted David Reyes with my legal communications. And in both cases, what I was actually trusting was a performance. She pressed her hands flat on the desk. I keep thinking about what you said. About how I evaluate performance over people. I said it explained something, Ethan said. I didn't say it was unfixable. She looked at him. Is it? I think you already started fixing it, he said. The day you put me on this floor. I put you on this floor because you walked into my office and saw something private and handled it with more grace than anyone I'd met in years, she said. I'm not sure that was strategy. Maybe it doesn't have to be strategy, he said. Maybe sometimes the right call and the honest impulse are the same thing. She looked at him for a long moment. And there it was again, the fracture line in the composure, the seam that showed when she forgot to hide it. But this time, she didn't resettle the professional face over the top of it. She left it where it was. My father would have liked you, she said again. She'd said it once before in this same room and pulled back from it. This time, she didn't pull back. He valued people who said the true thing plainly. He said the rarest quality in any room is a person who is the same person whether anyone is watching or not. Ethan thought about his mother cleaning houses she'd never live in, knowing the truth of every place from the inside. He thought about 6 years of level 2 of safe choices, made from a place of love, that had calcified over time into a kind of smallness he hadn't fully named until this floor had forced him to. My mother would have liked you, he said. And then because it was true, and because she'd been honest first, she would have said you worked too hard at being unbreakable. Aurora looked at him. Something in her expression shifted, moved through several things at once, the way a complex structure moves when the load on it changes. Not collapse, the opposite of collapse. The shift that happens when weight is redistributed correctly. She wouldn't be wrong, Aurora said quietly. The afternoon light was changing through the windows. He was specifically not describing it, but he felt it the way you feel the day tilting toward evening. Somewhere in the building below them, people were gathering their things and ending their days. Somewhere 30 stories down, Marcus Webb was probably signing off on work orders and complaining about something with the specific affection of a man who complains because he cares. I have to go get Lily, Ethan said. Go, she said. We'll talk tomorrow about the board meeting. He stood. He picked up the legal pad he'd brought in and hadn't needed. At the door, he stopped. Aurora. She looked up. Whatever happens in that board meeting, and I think Pharaoh's preliminary report makes the outcome pretty clear, this company is going to be fine. The structure is sound. What was failing was specific, and it's been identified. He paused. But after the meeting, you need to rebuild the floor. Not the physical floor, you already have that in hand. I mean the people on it. The systems of accountability. The way information moves up to you and down from you. He met her eyes. That's going to take longer than fixing a thermostat. I know, she said. I'd like to help with that, he said. If you want it. She looked at him steadily. I want it, she said. He nodded once. He left. The board meeting happened on a Tuesday. 8 days after Pharaoh's preliminary report, 6 days after David Reyes had quietly tendered his resignation and been replaced on an interim basis by Aurora's external counsel, 5 days after Paul Greer had been placed on administrative leave, pending a formal investigation into his communications with Derek Holt, and at least 2 board members whose names were now in the hands of Pharaoh's governance office. Ethan wore his best suit. He owned 2. The better one was charcoal gray, bought 3 years ago for his mother's funeral and worn twice since. He put it on at 6:30 in the morning. Lily watched him from the kitchen doorway while she ate her eggs. You look different, she said. I have an important meeting today. More important than usual. A little. She considered this. Are you nervous? He looked at himself in the hallway mirror, the suit, the badge he'd transferred to his jacket lapel, out of habit, and then removed the face of a man who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and had decided sometime in the past month to carry it differently. No, he said, and meant it. Lily pointed her fork at him with the authority of someone who had definitive opinions about formal attire. Your tie is crooked. He fixed it. She finished her eggs. He dropped her at school and drove to Hale Industries and rode the executive elevator for what felt like the 100th time and stepped out onto the 51st floor, which was quieter than he'd ever felt it, the specific quiet of a place holding its breath. Margaret was at her desk. She looked up when he came off the elevator. She looked at the suit. She looked at him. "Good morning, Mr. Cole," she said. And then, "You're ready." It wasn't a question. "Yes," he said. The boardroom was on the 51st floor's east side, a room he'd serviced twice, but never occupied for any purpose but work. He walked in behind Aurora's external counsel, a tall woman named Anna Reyes, who moved through rooms like someone who had never once in her life wondered whether she belonged in one. Aurora was already there at the head of the table in a dark navy suit with her hair down, a choice he'd realized over the past weeks that she made deliberately when she wanted to be herself rather than the icon. The 7 board members were present. 5 of them he recognized from the names Aurora had walked him through. 3 on her side. 4 he didn't know well enough to read yet. Richard Farrow sat along the wall, not at the table. Observer. He caught Ethan's eye briefly and nodded once. Ethan sat near the wall as well behind Aurora's counsel with his documentation folder on his knee. He was not performing calm. He was calm the real kind. The kind that comes not from certainty about outcomes, but from certainty about what you've done and why you've done it. The meeting ran for 2 hours and 14 minutes. Ethan was called to present twice. The first time was to walk the board through the structural assessment timeline, the inspection gaps, the documented discrepancies, the meridian confirmation. He did it the way he did everything, plainly, precisely, without drama or performance. He pointed to dates and photographs and records. He answered 4 questions from board members, 2 of them adversarial, with the same steadiness. When one of the 4, a man named Hargrove, who had the particular energy of someone who had arrived having already decided what he believed, suggested that Ethan's documentation was outcome-motivated. Ethan looked at him directly. "The documentation is dated," Ethan said. The Meridian engineers confirmed it independently. "The inspection log discrepancies are in the system records which predate my arrival on this floor. I didn't create the gaps, I found them. If you'd like to challenge the findings, I'd suggest engaging a second independent engineering firm." He paused. "The findings won't change." Hargrove looked at him. Something in the man's expression shifted. Not agreement, not defeat, but the particular recalibration of a man who had expected a different kind of opponent. The second time Ethan was called forward was to describe the phone call he'd received. He read from his written account, time-stamped precise. When he read the line about custody situation, the room went very still. 3 board members on Aurora's side looked at Hargrove. Hargrove looked at the table. When Ethan finished, Anna Reyes stood and presented the communications evidence linking the governance review motion to Derek Holt's information pipeline. She presented it the way Ethan had written the structural report, undeniable. Date by date, message by message, cross-referenced and confirmed. By the time the formal vote came, it wasn't close. The governance review motion failed 5-2. Hargrove and 1 other board member voted to sustain it. The remaining 5, including one of the 4, Ethan hadn't been sure about a quiet woman named Patricia Voss, who had said almost nothing for 2 hours and then clearly voted to dismiss. After the formal business concluded, the room had the specific atmosphere of a space where something has just been decided and nobody is quite ready to leave, because leaving makes it real. People gathered their things slowly. Some of them spoke in low voices. Aurora stood at the head of the table, receiving the board members who approached her, 3 on her side. First brief and warm, and then to Ethan's surprise, Patricia Voss, who shook Aurora's hand and said something quiet that made Aurora nod with genuine gravity. Hargrove left without speaking to Aurora. He passed Ethan near the door, and he stopped just for a second and looked at him with the full weight of a man who has lost a thing he was certain he'd win. "You're not what I expected," Hargrove said. "No," Ethan said. "I don't suppose I am." Hargrove left. Farrow found Ethan near the wall and shook his hand. "Good work," he said simply. the highest praise Ethan suspected that Richard Farrow dispensed in any setting. "Thank you," Ethan said. The room emptied. Aurora was the last one. She came to him when everyone else had gone, not the CEO, walking toward a technician, not a powerful woman managing a complex situation, just a person walking toward another person in a quiet room after something hard had passed. "It's done," she said. "For now," he said. "There's still the investigation. Greer the board members Reyes." "I know, but today is done." She looked at him. "You held the room, Ethan." "The documentation held the room," he said. "I just carried it in." She shook her head slightly. "You know that's not true." He let it sit. Maybe it wasn't entirely true. Maybe the past month had clarified something about who he was that he'd been keeping at a low volume for too long. He didn't know yet how to fully reckon with that. He suspected it would take longer than the month it had taken to disturb it. "I need to get Lily," he said. Aurora smiled, the full one this time, the real one that he'd seen exactly twice, and that was nothing like what the company's mythology about her would have predicted. It was warm and a little crooked and entirely unperformed. "Go get her," Aurora said. He got his daughter. She came down the school steps with her backpack and her braids, and her face lit up from the inside, and she grabbed his hand before he could even crouch down. Already talking today, there had been a substitute teacher who had mispronounced 3 words, and the whole class had very politely not laughed, which Lily described with the moral seriousness of a future judge. He listened. He asked follow-up questions. He held her hand. They were almost to the car when she said, "Did you win?" He looked down at her. "What? Your meeting. Did you win?" He thought about that. About 2 hours and 14 minutes in a boardroom. About a vote. About the specific difference between winning a thing and doing a thing right. "The right thing happened," he said. She processed this for a step or two. "That's the same as winning," she decided. "Yeah," he said. "I think it might be." He buckled her in. He got in the driver's seat. His phone buzzed a text from Marcus, who had somehow heard something, because Marcus always heard something. "Heard the meeting went well. Knew you'd handle it. Don't forget you're still level 2 on paper. HR paperwork is slow." Ethan typed back, "I know." A minute passed. Then Marcus again. "For what it's worth, Cole should have pushed for level 3 6 years ago. That's on me." Ethan looked at that for a moment. He thought about safe choices and right choices and the space between them. He thought about 6 years of keeping his head down and the single broken light that had ended all of that on an otherwise ordinary Tuesday. He typed, "Buy me a coffee sometime. We'll call it even." He drove. Lily had moved on from the substitute teacher to a detailed theory about why dinosaurs would have been bad at riding bikes, which she was developing with genuine intellectual rigor, and Ethan engaged it fully, asking follow-up questions about the specific physical limitations of a Tyrannosaurus Rex on a 10-speed, because it was the most important conversation happening anywhere in the city at that moment as far as he was concerned. 2 weeks later, Ethan Cole was formally reclassified. The title was Director of Facilities Operations Executive Division. Not a promise, not a temporary adjustment. A permanent position at a level that made the numbers on his paycheck something he'd never looked at before. Without doing math, that didn't work out. He read the offer letter at his kitchen table with the bills still in their drawer, not stacked on the surface anymore, because the drawer was where bills went when they stopped being a crisis, and he sat with it for a long time before he signed it. He thought about his mother, who had cleaned other people's houses for 25 years and known their truth from the inside. He thought about Lily asleep down the hall with the light on. He thought about a broken light fixture on a Tuesday morning, and an elevator rising through a building, and a door that was supposed to be a simple work order and wasn't. He thought about what Aurora had said about her father. He showed his approval by giving you more responsibility. He picked up the pen. He signed his name. Ethan Cole had spent 6 years learning that some doors aren't meant for men like him, learning it not because anyone had said it plainly, but because the world had communicated it through 1,000 small arrangements, through freight elevators and level 2 badges, and safe choices made from love that slowly became habit. He had believed it the way you believe something you've never fully examined, because examining it required standing in a place you hadn't been permitted to stand. The 51st floor had changed that. Not because the floor was magic, not because Aurora Hale had reached down from some great height and granted him a new life, but because a structure had been failing quietly, invisibly, and he had walked into the room when it made the sound that precedes collapse, and he had heard it, and he had done what he had always done. He told the truth about what he found, and he fixed what could be fixed, and he held steady in the room while everything around him came loose. That was who Ethan Cole had always been. The 51st floor didn't make him. It just finally put him somewhere you could see it, and that it turned out was enough to change everything.